This is my 2017 ARPOD 179, and my shower floor pan cracked last summer, and I used a putty type compound to seal the crack. Then I used Flex Seal tape to cover the whole thing. I made a mistake when I did that, in that where the crack is propagating, I'd forgotten that to stop a crack that's from expanding further, you drill holes so that you can't keep growing. I forgot to do that. That putty type material eventually failed about a month ago. So it lasted the bulk of last fall, through the winter, and most of this spring and part of the summer, right? So I did a good job for about 9 months, 8 months. Then eventually that putty failed, and the crack kept growing. So I tore off all the old Flex Seal tape, and that took a long time because it's gooey kind of stuff, right? The Flex Seal tape did a really good job of preventing it from leaking. So it took a little bit of scraping to get that putty material off. And then this is where I made a mistake of not having prepped the area beforehand, because I initially, what I tried doing was using Loctite construction foam type material. Well, it comes with a little straw for it to be applied to a specific area. With that little straw though, I need to go from up under here all the way back, reaching with my arm to back here, and I was trying to spray up underneath here. The issue with this shower pan is it's plastic. So the plastic shower pan had too much of an air gap with the way it's supported from underneath. What they did when they constructed this was underneath there, to give it support when you're stepping on it, a styrofoam board under there. And underneath that then is a wooden board. And then to give because the height difference between the floor and where the floor of the RV and the floor of the pan, they used 2x4s to try and correct that height. My ARPOD, unfortunately, when they made that 2x4, they made it just a little too short. And as a result, when you stepped on it, it caused all that to flex, because that 2x4 wasn't actually touching the floor. So when it cracked last summer, I used a plastic shim underneath the 2x4 to try and get more support on the whole floor of the shower. To using that Loctite construction foam, what I was trying to do between the shower pan and that styrofoam board was try and spray coming up from underneath here. It's all in the blind, I can't really see what I'm doing. Is reach up there and spray. To get that can though, there's no way I can get that can up underneath there and do all this work. So I got an air tube about yay long, and then I took a metal coat hanger rod to give it stiffness. And I was able to bend that whole metal rod and the air tube attached to the can up underneath here and try and spray, but it's all in the blind. So I had to keep spraying. I could hear the can spraying, but I couldn't see what I was doing. So I'm reaching up underneath the floor. I had to keep filling until I could feel it on my fingers that I was actually spraying. The problem was I didn't prep this area firsthand. I still had the old Flex Seal tape and the putty while I'm trying to spray underneath there. I didn't think this through. The problem was so try and visualize this shower pan, right? The crack was about here, but I'm spraying up to about this part here, and as a result, where the crack, if this was the crack, right? It's confusing. Go with me here. The Loctite foam, as it's expanding, was causing it to part and causing a bigger gap where the crack was. Well, the problem then was, it was almost an hour later after I cleaned all this up before I could try and get the bulk of the floor then to lift up. What I did then was to get the rest of this floor to lift up to match where this edge was, since this edge had lifted up from where I'm spraying underneath. The Loctite that I sprayed, I drilled holes, a couple different spots. I drilled the holes through the floor, and then using the spray can of Loctite construction foam, sprayed in here. So as the construction foam expanded, this would lift up and try and get these two edges of the crack back to level. So once I tried to get those two edges as close to possible, what I then did was I used a Flex Seal tube product and tried squeezing that product in between there to try and get rid of any rough edges after I'd sanded it down, and try and get that as close to being the same, give it a smoother transition. I let that set overnight, and then using Flex Seal spray, I put 4 applications. I'm going to do one more tonight. It'll be a total of 5 applications of Flex Seal. Now the problem though is with this product, this Flex Seal in a can, when I sprayed it in there, it made these little air pockets, And some of those air pockets stayed as air, but it stayed nice and sealed, right? But otherwise, some of those air bubbles basically popped, and now they have these little divots. So it's kind of a porous surface now, which I'm not too happy with that kind of idea. But I'm going to use it in this Flex Seal tape, which is not porous. And this is what held, well, until I tore it off yesterday. This is what basically was stopping the leak, along with that putty that finally cracked. So I'm going to put this down on top of that, and that should completely seal it. And that's 3 different Flex Seal products, all to cover up the crack in my floor pan, in my shower pan. So hopefully you can see, maybe not, there's little tiny dimples in some parts of where the spray in a can kind of stuffed material from the little bubbles, and the bubbles popped and made these little dimples. So it's kind of quasi porous, I guess, but it's got 4 coats, and I'm going to do one more coat for tonight, then put down a Flex Seal tape, so that should completely seal that off. So there's the 5th coating. You can see kind of the little dimpling just through there. There's some of that dimpling again. So maybe as the product will, maybe since it's still wet, maybe it'll smooth out a little bit, but it doesn't completely. I'll use that Flex Seal tape and I'll cover it, make it nice and smooth, and it should hold. And the floor is very tight now, so it's not likely that it'll wiggle anymore. And with all that Flex Seal material on top of there, should be no leaks. So today on Facebook group for RPod owners was a question of how to fix low water pressure coming out of the kitchen sink. Turns out it's really easy, and it's happened to me as well. And I posted this, sent a picture to him, and sure enough it fixed it for him. The issue is, when they manufacture travel trailers and RPods, they do them really fast. They don't pay much attention to what they're doing, and there's just general corrosion products over time in your piping, mostly from your hot water tank. If you take this little guy off, take your little gasket out, pop this guy up. You gotta be careful, there's lots of little pieces. If you do this wrong, it won't go back together correctly. Separate this. Now here's your little screen mesh. Mine just happens to have 3 pieces of screen mesh. You'll get a lot of calcium buildup on these little screen meshes. Just rub them together and it'll basically break it off. Put this guy back together. That's one place that will reduce your water pressure out of your tap. The other one, I need something to pry this thing apart. This little piece of plastic, it's 2 pieces actually. It's got a little bitty tiny hole on this end, and the water comes out the other end. So what you do is you pry this guy apart, pull this 2 pieces apart, and this little one here, kind of hard for me to hold in front of the camera. This little guy here tends to collect inside it little debris particles. Could be sawdust, pieces of plastic from construction, and corrosion products, and just stuff in the pipe. Clean this guy out, and you put the guy back together. This guy back. The lines, there's grooves, so you gotta spin it till it finally lines up correctly. Put your gasket back in. Put it back on the faucet. There you go. You got good water pressure again, and that fixed their problem, and it fixed my problem in the past as well. It's been a week since I made repairs to my floor shower pan. You can see it's holding up really well. You can see where the crack was. I couldn't quite get the floor to level. And my hand oil, when I was showing the video before I put the tape down, you can see where some of my just oils from my hand is discolored a little bit, plus the shadowing where the original crack was. But then I put the Flex Seal tape, and you can see where there's an overlap from where I sprayed. And then here at the bottom, there's a bigger overlap from where the Flex Seal tape and the Flex Seal spray application went down. So it worked out really well. I've been using it every day for 7 days, and it's holding really well. And this is nice and hard. There's no more wiggling, which is what the whole reason why it cracked in the first place. There was just too much wiggling in the floor. But that works.